But she looked awesome in the Millie costume. Kind of made my whole day.
I know how excited she was.
Harris, our Events and Emergency Management Coordinator, to talk about the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. I just wanted to put in a pitch to everybody who sits around the table. Last night's Budget Committee meeting, participating over Zoom, was an eye-opener for me about how little gets picked up on Zoom. So the people sitting there were very audible. The people sitting around here were in and out and in and out. And so I do think it's important that you talk directly into your microphone because there was a lot of things that were not audible last night.
Absolutely a great point, Mayor. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's also worth it for council members, but also for the public to know that we are in an interim transition period now officially. The cameras and the AV system we have in use in this building are temporary, as our permanent cameras and equipment have been relocated already to New City Hall. So absolutely a great reminder, please speak, please project loudly as you can so that the microphone in the center of the room picks it up for Zoom. But also to the mayor's point, do be mindful of your microphone as Willamette Falls is still operating through these mics and picking up for the feed that goes to cable and then will be replayed later. The mics are important and that puck is important, so projecting is important.
Okay, great. Well, and once we are in the new building with the new equipment, I mean, maybe there's fine tuning and more instructions to be had, but it was just a little bit of an eye opener for me last night. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Harris to talk about the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan.
We have the geese for the talking.
Oh, we don't.
They should be in that cupboard right there next to Councilor Snap. Oh, no, I'm sorry, behind you.
Our little geese
Right here.
signalers.
Oh.
Ooh, that's magic. I didn't know that.
This whole time?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's been there for you.
like
Would you
the
please take one and pass it
entrance
down?
to
I
the
don't know
Bat
if there's a
Cave.
sign. Yeah, come on out there, you.
Found your peanut butter cups, Mayor.
I did, and I don't know if they were found or replaced, but yeah. Oh.
My microphone here.
You still want to speak into it.
Okay.
Alrighty, look at that. We're all here together again. Thank you, Mayor Beatty, Council, for having me here. As the mayor said, my name is Dan Harris. I'm our Events and Emergency Management Coordinator, and this is the second update on the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. It's a relatively short update this time. Essentially, I'm here to talk about the public engagement work that's been done over the course of the last 2 weeks since the last time that I was here. I would be remiss in talking about natural hazards to not acknowledge that there are a number of fires burning around our region and around our nation right now, including especially on the island of Maui. So our thoughts are with them. All right, the NHMP engagement summary. On July 31st, the Engage Milwaukie page for this project was launched. As of the time of creating these slides last Friday, we had 227 page visits, 60 poll responses, and then 6 original comments or questions. Of those, I would point out, I just checked back in on the poll responses, and according to those, which obviously this is a non-scientific sampling, the question was, based on the current supplies in your household of food, water, and medicine, how long could your household last without outside assistance in the event of a major emergency? I'm paraphrasing that. I apologize. I don't have the language here in front of me. But according to that, as of this afternoon, about 2/3 of respondents say that they're ready to sustain for at least a week without outside assistance. So I am looking at different ways to get a more scientific sampling of the population because, as is spelled out in the plan, one of my major goals for the next 5 years for this position is to try to get more of our community's households ready to go at least 2 weeks. And that includes stockpiling water, stockpiling food, stockpiling medications, and then any other day-to-day necessities. So if that is to be believed, and we absolutely should not take it at face value, about 2/3 of households are well on their way there. On August 1st, a pilot article was published, the city's newsletter, talking about the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and directing folks to Engage Milwaukie to participate and ask questions and get more information. We sent out a community partners email. The full list is in the staff report, but more than 20 community organizations. I emailed more than 20 community organizations directly. I have gotten back, as of now, 4 replies from groups that I've contacted. I've also received contact from 3 different community members who wrote rather than contacting me through Engage Milwaukie. Those changes have been reflected in the versions of the natural hazard mitigation plan that are included in the packet, both the red line and the clean version. And then on August 9th, we put out a Facebook post through the city's Facebook page, which was then reshared to the Milwaukie Chit Chat group, one of the main points of conversation for our community, letting everyone know again about Engage Milwaukie and specifically the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan project listed there. Outstanding issues, things that have come up, either from public comment or from conversations with council, the specific effects of simultaneous Clackamas River dam failures. So PGE maintains 4 dams on the Clackamas River just above its confluence with the Willamette. Well, I say just above, but above its confluence with the Willamette. And the original version of this plan from 5 years ago stated that there would be a certain amount of inundation in the, I want to emphasize, highly unlikely event of a simultaneous failure of all 4 of those dams. Mayor Beatty asked a question about, is that number accurate? The number that was listed fed back into, or cited the county's emergency operations plan. When I went back to find that in the emergency operations plan for the county, what was listed there was that the PGE maps were the source of that information. So I now have contacted PGE, and they're being very intentional about who they release that information to. So I would like to have a specific answer to that question. The short version is that if all 4 of those dams were to fail at the exact same time, that would result in some amount of flooding in the section of the Willamette River immediately adjacent to Milwaukie. It's unclear exactly how much that would be. Also, seismic stability of Linwood Elementary buildings. There was some work done on retrofitting and or rebuilding Linwood in the last 5 years. The most recent Dogami Department of Geology, the most recent statewide survey showed that Linwood had a relatively high probability of collapse in the event of an earthquake. But we know that some work has been done on it, so I'm in contact with the facility operations for the North Clackamas School District, trying to get an answer about, hey, what is the seismic survivability of Linwood specifically at this point? And I do not have an answer back on that yet, but I will have an answer on that before we send this to the county for review. And then the other piece that really is going on right now is just general clerical cleanup. We want to make sure there are a number of tables in the plan, and so for example, maybe you're on page MA15 and it says, well, this table is on the next page. As edits have been made, as things have moved around, those aren't all necessarily still accurate. So I'm going to give it a good thorough proofreading before it moves forward. And then also to ensure that the plan aligns with the city's style guide. So when I say general clerical cleanup, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. In terms of next steps, before the end of this week, and really before the end of the day on Thursday, an updated version of the plan will be posted to the Engage page, and we'll be sending out some additional communication around that, reminding the public, reminding just Milwaukeeans generally that is available, and it'll give everybody an opportunity to see what changes have been made. Comments remain open until August 31st, so anybody who is watching this, anyone who has not yet had a chance to review that plan, Engage Milwaukie, or if you go to milwaukieoregon.gov, there on the homepage there is a link in the banner specifically to that Engage page. Please take a chance to review the plan and submit any comments or questions that you might have. My contact information rather is there, but it's also going to be on the next slide. The Hazard Mitigation Advisory Committee is going to be meeting once more in early September to review the most recent version of the plan. The Hazard Mitigation Advisory Committee, I have not talked about in this meeting. I did talk about in the last meeting. It's the internal group that represents city employees reviewing this. And those departments represented there include Public Works, the Police Department, Community Development. Before the end of September, we'll be submitting a more or less final draft of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan to Clackamas County. As I said in my last meeting here, our plan is an appendix to the county's plan. And so what we're doing really is we're submitting a chunk of their plan to them. They will review that. It'll be returned back to me with any notes, any edits, any red lines that the county has. We will accept or adjust those as necessary. Again, this will go from us to the county, to us, to the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, back to us, to FEMA, to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and then it will be returning to this council in February of 2024 for a final review and hopefully adoption as Milwaukee's updated natural hazard mitigation plan. This concludes my presentation properly, but I would just say that, again, my name is Dan Harris. I can be reached at harrisd@milwaukeeoregon.gov or at 503-786-7519 if anybody's seeing this and does have any questions or comments about the plan.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I'll turn first to Councilor Stavanger with any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate all your work on this. Thanks for the additional outreach. I just had one question. It refers to the first slide where you gave kind of an overview of the participation and responses on Engage Milwaukie.
Sure.
I was wondering if you have some of the characteristic data from people who are using that platform, or even better, those that responded, to see if there's a way to look at access and affluence as an indicator of readiness.
I appreciate the question, Counselor. I don't have that available here right now, but I would be happy to see what of that information we can pull down, and I would be happy to share that with you or with the council more widely. I will say that survey specifically, which was addressing readiness, does not require registration. It's been our practice to have something that people can engage with without registering and without providing their data. So I don't know for sure exactly how much of that we're going to be able to trace back to demographics, but I will pull the information that I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Koster-Body?
Just curious on the seismic stability issue. That's a little concerning. I know that's really not something that we typically take care of, but that's an ongoing process you were saying, the seismic stability issue? The retrofitting, is that ongoing with the school?
Well, that's sort of the question, Counselor. So right now, I don't believe that there is ongoing work at the school. My understanding is that there was work that was completed in 2019, 2020. But what I don't have and what I have not been able to get an answer on yet is specifically what that work was and what work may have been done to seismically reinforce, or again, if it was some kind of I don't know to what extent that threat has been mitigated at this point, and that's what I'm trying to find out.
Okay. And then I guess just, well, actually this is a question for outreach, so it's fine. I'm good on that. I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Massey?
Thanks, Dan. Just as a comment on the question about the schools, as I remember, the big school district bond included a lot of seismic retrofit. I know that was included in the new high school building, was it not?
Other schools that got
Yeah,
rebuilt.
yeah. So I don't know if all of the seismic issues were taken care of or not, but that'd be an interesting question, obviously, to follow up on. What was your reaction to, the numbers of people who said they had, I think it was a week's worth of supplies?
Sure.
I mean, I was quite frankly surprised and somewhat pleased.
I would agree with that sentiment. I would echo it. I think that for a lot of people, the idea of disaster preparedness is a little bit intimidating, and it can be a little bit scary. You know, sometimes if I find myself putting together an earthquake kit, in a way that's acknowledging that I might be hit by an earthquake. But the fact is I might be hit by an earthquake, and that's not something to be afraid of. It is something to be aware of, and it's something to be prepared for. And I would say that is a natural hazard that we can each individually within our household, whatever that might look like, work to mitigate. So I was delighted to see, frankly, that a third of respondents said they had at least 2 weeks of supplies, and that is the recommended amount is 14 days, which would be a gallon of water for each person in your household per day, along with food and again medication. Those are the three really big things. And then another third said that they were ready for about a week, which, you know, honestly, if you can get, there's no shame in being ready for 3 days. Being ready for 3 days is going to be a whole lot less strain that's being put on emergency responders, on larger scale relief efforts. So I was very happy to see 2/3 of people ready for at least a week, and I would like to see what we can do to push those numbers up. Although I do want to say again, I don't think that should be used as any kind of a baseline just because of the non-scientific nature of the survey.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, but at any rate, I was somewhat surprised and pleased. But, you know, putting together this, you know, the earthquake kit or the bug out kit, that's something that you can do next weekend, you know? And so it frequently gets pushed out and that kind of thing. So, and I was involved in some things like this on the corporate side, and frequently I'd get a question of, well, what should I have? And there's lots of guidance out there from the Red Cross and FEMA. I mean, they've got it down to earthquake, wildfire. You know, they've got a checklist for each disaster, and so in any of this, is that information? Is it acknowledged that information should be available somehow in a more easy, you know, to reach, you know, guide for people?
Absolutely. So right now that information is linked back to, I believe that we used FEMA, but it may have been the Red Cross, but that information is linked back through the city's emergency management webpage.
Okay.
And one of our action items is communicating those specific guidelines or recommendations. I don't want to say requirements because nobody's going to make you do an earthquake kit, but those recommendations out to the public more effectively. And that can look like a variety of different things. That can be a presence at city and community events, maybe in the form of a stand-up booth. That can be just this last June or July, just this last summer, we published an article in the Pilot talking about water storage and getting that gallon a day ready. So yes, that should be more widely available, and yes, there are specific plans in place and more generalized plans in place to get that information out.
Yeah, it's not something the city or the county needs to invent, because the other sort of experts in emergency management have done that work for us, and we can just link it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not presume to tell the Red Cross how to prepare for disasters, but I do appreciate that they have made that information so widely available.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing else? Council President Nicodemus?
Thank you, Dan, for your work. I really don't have anything. Just
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I had a couple questions. I have a couple of more minor things that I'll send you by email after this. But I had a couple of questions. One was, early in the document, there's like the green charts with the action items. And then at the end, they're again as appendices, but like a little more filled out. Is that the difference between the two sets of them? The ones at the end are just a more descriptive.
Absolutely, Mayor Beatty. What the intention there is to be able to say, okay, well these are the action items. Quick reference here at the beginning. For additional information, see attachment 1 And then
Okay.
when you go down to attachment 1, okay, well, let's flesh this out. And it's
Okay.
because attachment 1 is something like 7 or 8 pages long. And when
Okay.
you try to insert that into the document earlier, it becomes unreadable.
Okay.
So.
Okay. I noticed shelter sites were schools and churches, basically. I just wanted to mention that back when I was a neighborhood chair and my neighborhood was working on this, my neighborhood was very proactive and bought tents and bought water purification equipment and bought walkie-talkies and things. There was work that CERT was doing with the Oddfellows here in downtown and with the Grange Hall as potential shelter sites. The Oddfellows, they had identified that there's a pretty good sized parking lot behind it, and it was almost like more using that parking lot for some tenting and some staging than maybe the Oddfellows Hall itself, depending on the nature of the incident. And Oddfellows Hall may or may not, withstand things well. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that they had looked at some of those community organization kind of buildings. I think also over at 42nd and Harrison, there's that sort of community center building that's used by some groups in town. So just want to mention that for whatever it's worth. And then on the outreach piece, I just wanted to mention another thing my neighborhood did, which was they bought emergency kits and gave them as sort of door prizes or raffle prizes, like for the neighborhood picnic. The city often gives some sort of enticement like that for some of our open houses events for things around town, like the TSP maybe or something. So I just want to put that out there as a thing to think about, like bulk buying some emergency kits and using them for those kind of events where we want to have incentives rather than gift cards, which are also sometimes used. Maybe thinking about using some of those. Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's a great document. It was very informative, like I said last time, and it was good reading. And I'll try to get some more people to take the survey between now and the end of August too. So.
Thank you very much, Mayor Beatty. I appreciate it.
Anything else from anyone? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item is to talk about water SDCs. And I guess maybe this is the first of talking about a lot of our SDCs. I don't know. Or maybe it's just the water. But I invite up our Public Works Director, Peter Passarelli, and it looks like he has some consultants with him.
Thank you, Mayor Beatty. I am Peter Passarelli. I'm the Public Works Director, and this evening, or this afternoon actually, we've have a discussion for you on our water SDC, System Development Charge. I think some of you have met John and Zach before when we talked about our Parks SDC earlier this year. We brought them on board to help us put together, update our methodology for our water SDC, which haven't been updated for quite a while since our previous water systems plan. With the adoption of our water systems plan last June, we moved forward with updating our methodology and capturing the changes in that capital improvement plan, and took the opportunity to start down the path of updating the methodology to also capture some of our changes in rate structures that we did in our wastewater SDC. So John and Zach will provide you a presentation and walk you through the process that they've gone through.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So the way that we've laid this out, we've got a couple of background slides, and then Zach will walk through at a summary level the calculations. And then we'll come back and talk about some implementation considerations and next steps. So a reminder about system development charges. These are one-time fees paid at the time of development by new development, or in some cases redevelopment if it's upsizing its meter or adding additional demand. The statute allows system development charges to be charged for water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and parks. Tonight we're talking about water. SDCs are for capital only, so we can't use these except in one very specific instance. We can't use these for operations. We can only use these for capital projects, and we calculate them based on the cost of capital and infrastructure. They include two pieces. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Two separate fees that together equal the system development charge. One being the reimbursement fee, which is a buy-in to any existing oversized infrastructure, and the second fee being an improvement fee, and that's based on the growth-related cost of planned projects, so anything that's increasing capacity for future users. And again, the SDCs are not for local facilities, so it's not the cost of the meter we're talking about for water. We're talking about a share of the bigger system facilities that's includable. We follow the law very carefully, the statute, and there's some case law out there. The general calculation framework is shown here. That reimbursement fee that I mentioned, we isolate first the existing cost or value of infrastructure that's already in the ground, unused capacity. So anything that's not being used by existing customers that's available for growth, we've got to isolate that portion of the existing system, and that cost divided by the growth that it will serve gives us our reimbursement fee. The improvement fee, picture a long list of capital projects. We are identifying the growth-related portion of each of those projects, if there is one, the capacity increasing portion. The sum total of those project costs, again, divided by growth, gives us our improvement fee. And together, they equal the system development charge. One portion of it's intended to represent the cost of a share of system capacity that will serve that new development. A portion of it's already been built. A portion of it is yet to be built to serve that growth. So this is the current City of Milwaukie water system development charge schedule. You notice the charges go up by the size of the meter. That's based on the flow capacity of each meter. Larger meters, obviously, you can get more water through. So a typical single-family residence is a 3/4 inch meter, so they would pay that $2,297, a new single-family residence in the City of Milwaukie.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the calculation pretty quickly here. You might recognize this slide from February, pretty much the same layout here. So at the top is the cost bases of the SDC components. The very top there is the improvement fee cost basis for almost 11.6 million. Reimbursement fee there, 1.5 million. Compliance cost, 1 million. And compliance is that one operational piece that we can include in the SDC. That's for calculating the SDC and administering the program. So we can include a little bit of money for that. The total cost basis you can see there is 14.1 million. We divide that by the growth in MCEs we're expecting over the 20-year planning period. We get a total SDC per MCE at the very bottom there of $5,708, which is the charge that a typical single-family dwelling unit would pay if you adopted the fully calculated SDC. And of course, this is just the maximum that we're showing you, not what you have to adopt. So now we'll look at each of these pieces in a little bit more detail. So starting with growth, We're expecting a growth of 2,485 meter capacity equivalents, and that is based on projected peak season max day demands between 2023 and 2040, which is the planning horizon of the master plan. Using that growth and growing the expected number of MCEs proportionally, that's how we get that 2,485 MCEs. Also, you'll see in the far right there the growth share percentage, which is just over 22%. That represents, in 2040, the percentage of the population that will have arrived between now and then. And that proportion is useful for figuring out the fair share cost for some of these projects. Okay, so next up is the improvement fee cost basis, which is made up of the capital costs on your project list. There are a total of 11.6 million in SDC eligible costs. I've highlighted some of the major projects here. So the biggest share is at 22.7 million, which is related to a bunch of small pipeline projects around the city. Some of these are going to be SDC eligible, and some of them are not. They might be solving a existing deficiency in the fire flow system, or they might be providing capacity for new users that are expected. So some of that 22.7 million is eligible, and some of it is not. Then we've got a couple other big projects here, an additional 3 million gallon storage reservoir, some tank recoding projects, and then some additional pump stations for 1.6 million. At the bottom here is a brief just showing you what the project list will look like once we finished our report. You can see we have projects 1, 2, 3, skip a few, 93, 94, 95. And the total project cost is just shy of 50 million, and once again, the eligible cost is 11.6 million. All right.
Can you do me a favor? I can't read what the projects are. Can you just walk through what those are?
Oh, do you mean the projects on the table there? Okay, sure. So we have some miscellaneous equipment replacement and upgrade, some intertie development, reestablishing the production of well 8, then skipping down to quite a few projects, 90 projects to get to 93. We're doing system-wide seismic evaluation, planning and securing of additional water rights, and lead and copper compliance study.
And all the projects, the full list will be included in the report. We just collapsed it for today.
So we ordinarily try to hold questions to the end, but I guess I want to understand this a little better. So the 49 million, the 11 million is 22%. You said the growth was?
Yeah, kind of, close. So if you notice, we have this is the full project list as spelled out in the master plan. Mm-hmm. You'll notice there's a column there called SDC eligibility. And that's where we've gone through and looked at the details of the project to determine, okay, is this for existing users? You know, is this fixing a deficiency? In which case it gets 0%. Or is this completely for growth? Maybe it gets 100%. You'll notice that a lot of these are getting that growth share of 22.29%, where we're kind of saying this will benefit both existing and future users equally. So that's why 11.6 million is not 22% of 49.9 million.
It's close, but yeah.
Okay.
Stop me if this is too much, but there, just as a couple of examples here, there are a couple pump station projects where we had very specific information about the capacity that was being added. So, for example, replacing the third zone pump station with 2,000 gallons per minute pumps is 40.43% eligible for the improvement fee, and that's included. There's a second pump station project that's 55.25%. It just so happens that we end up at almost 22% for the full list.
So that percent is the calculation of it's going to serve 55% of who it serves is new users
Exactly.
versus 45%
Exactly.
is existing users.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So if there's no more questions on this slide, the next one is looking at the existing facilities. And we've sorted these into functions where we've identified capacity. So we have supply, storage, pumping, transmission, and distribution. In the next column there, you'll see the estimated capacity for growth. That is how much is available that will be used by growth between now and 2040. So we've got capacity for growth in supply, storage, and pumping, but not T&D. The original cost is listed there based on the records that we have. So a total original cost of 21.5 million. But when accounting for what's available for growth and giving them only their share, the reimbursable cost is 1.5 million for those existing facilities. And then lastly, bringing it back together to what's actually going to appear in your rate schedule. We have the SDC by meter size, where you can see the different components broken out. Improvement, that's a project list, related fee, reimbursement fee, which is related to the existing facilities, compliance, and then the full fee on the far right, which you can see for a typical single family at the maximum calculation here would be $5,700. And in theory, you know, if you ever got a 12-inch meter installed, could go up to $963,000. So I'll hand it back over to John to talk about some implementation things.
So one of the concerns that we're hearing around the state, and in fact, we were involved in this legislative study of system development charges and how they affect affordable housing. Affordability is a concern we're hearing. So one of the approaches that I think is gaining some traction in at least trying to address this in a rate-making fashion in which it's cost-based and impact-based is this idea of scaling system development charges by the size of the home. And Water Environment Services, WES, has done some research linking house size to water use, occupancy, and water use. They've used that in the wastewater SDCs. You've seen it here in the wastewater SDCs. So we applied those factors to develop a scalable system development charge that could be applied to 3/4-inch meter single-family residences only. It would allow some additional resolution besides that scheduled by the size of the meter. So this would be within the 3/4-inch class, and you see how for smaller homes between 500 and 800 square feet, for example, 500 or below is a pretty small dwelling unit. It would apply to an accessory dwelling unit. You see how the charges could be scaled by the size of the home. The average home size in the city of Milwaukee falls between 1,800 and 2,999 square feet. So that's where the base SDC would be, and then the charges would go up for larger homes and down for smaller homes. So we wanted to show you that that option. And so it would also make the schedule then consistent with the wastewater schedule as applied by WES. Just to give you a sense, and of course everybody's systems and needs are different, but we are seeing some pretty big numbers in water system development charges. These are all for a typical single-family residence for these different cities. You see Westland, Oregon City. Many of these have underlying regional charges, but together a new single-family residence in those locations would pay these water SDCs. And you see where the calculated charges that you've seen tonight would put the city of Milwaukee. So finally, we have a draft document describing this in narrative. If everything looks acceptable to the council, then the next step would be to issue a 90-day notice of a public hearing. The law requires 90-day notice before you can act to adopt the new charges. The report that we complete then has to be available for the last 60 days of that 90-day period. So once you set the public hearing date, we deliver the report. It's available for anyone to scrutinize, any interested parties. And then once that public hearing comes around, the council can act to adopt up to the amounts charged here. And that's our prepared material.
All right. Thank you very much. So I'll turn again to Councilor Stavengerd for first questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, John, Zach. I appreciate the information. I only have two questions. One has to do with the slide 7, which is the one that the mayor had a question about. I was wondering, of the 95 projects, are those in priority order, or are those just in a list of 95?
They're in a list with dates, so I guess they're not prioritized by necessarily by need. But they are prioritized, I guess, by how they would be executed over time.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
Okay.
Looks like
Hi,
Maybe
Peter.
I could add a little bit about that. So, when we developed the CIP, the projects in that systems plan, we did take a look at what are our most immediate needs in terms of current infrastructure, and then we also, some of these are forecasted to handle additional growth out through 2040. So they're sort of forecasted and planned and timelined based on how we expect growth to occur. So
Okay.
some of these projects are generally are related to future growth, right? That may occur or may not occur, but those are the needs of the system. So there is some priority there on how we did that. But the list, the 1 through 95 is not prioritized in that
Okay.
respect.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. You might want to hang out for the second question, though. I have a question about the formula that you use for future growth and how that may have been influenced by middle housing. If it just comes down to meter size, or if the future density of middle housing is taken into consideration when we're planning out the future growth through 2040.
And I can talk to that too.
Okay.
So both with our water and wastewater systems plans, we spent a lot of effort up front when we were doing putting those plans together, and worked with our planning department to identify future growth scenarios. So as part of that was this sort of densification and middle housing piece. And we worked with planning, and they had the Angelo Planning Group to put together buildable land inventory, and we spent a lot of time sort of making sure that both of these plans are sort of looking at the same growth scenarios and anticipating those growths. Now, some of that might have changed a little bit over the last couple of years, but these plans sort of coincided or worked together, looking at those different growth scenarios that the city had identified at the time.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I think, my mind just goes to how that may change the consulting industry and making sure that everyone's pulling from the same plan. So it's really great to hear that process was followed here. So thank you both. That's all the question that I have. Wow.
Will that music play after I get done?
Can be arranged, right?
Councilor Koster-Body?
Yeah, just to follow up on Councilor Stavanger, just the expected growth. So the 2,485, that's like units or just housing dwellings that you're calculating will be in the next, 17 years?
So those are meters as converted to the capacity of a 3/4 inch meter. So it's as if those were all single-family residences. We know they're not, but it takes that into account. So we're growing those proportionally with expected max day demand, which you see there, 4.13 MGD at 2019 to 2040's 5.64 MGD right out of the master plan. So, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Councilor Massey?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to get too far outside of my box, but where does multifamily residential fit in?
It depends on the size of the meter. So if you might find, and Peter could probably talk to this better than I can, but a larger complex with multiple units will require a larger water meter, and so they would be subject to a higher system development charge.
And our multifamily residential developments, they're generally singularly metered. So there'll be let's say a 6-inch meter going in to feed 6 or 7 giant, apartment complex units, and the the owner of the complex then individually meters or charges those tenants separately.
So it's just a bunch of single-family residential meters, right?
Well,
That's
but
not
it's
what he's
based off of,
saying.
it's based off of the meter size that's put in to handle the unit,
Well,
the development.
yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters about the meter size. It would just be multiples. It could be a big meter or it could be a bunch of little meters, right?
Well, no, I mean, it really sort of depends on the individual meter that's set for the development. That's where we charge the SDC. So it could be, in some cases, it could be a 4-inch meter to serve that development, and that 4-inch meter could serve, multiple 100
Yeah.
units there, right?
Yeah.
But we're
There's
gonna
no difference in the calculation. It's just the meter size, right?
There's no per dwelling unit
There's
charge.
there's not a
It's
per,
based on the size of
the
the
meter.
meter serving the complex.
I understand, but somehow our language is not the same. I got it.
I don't know if this is correct. You all can correct me. We treat multifamily often as commercial depending on size. So we're not looking at per unit, we're looking at as the commercial meter going into it, and that's the charge for the SDC. It's not per unit.
Got it.
Okay.
And then we are not billing those units individually. That's between the
Not for this
owner and their
SDC.
tenants.
That's
how
between the owner
they-
and the tenants. Yeah.
Okay.
On this SDC, there may be places where the units are actually charged in other utilities.
It's very rare that we charge and I won't say that there might be an exception, but almost all of our multifamily dwelling or multifamily units are billed to the owner, and the owner then bills the tenants.
Yeah.
There may be some exceptions,
But we may do it by unit in the development in some cases. I thought that like water was billed on a lower, sorry, I'm gonna stop what he said.
Okay. Councilor Massey, was there
I
anything
apologize
else?
for the question.
No, I think it's a useful question. And no others?
No.
Okay. Council President?
Yeah. Thank you for addressing the affordability. I'm just thinking, there are other things that are at play about affordability, like income inequality, gentrification. I don't know how often SDCs play into affordability of homes. Does that have a direct impact? Because isn't that when you're buying the house, it's put into that cost. So I appreciate them thinking about affordability, but to me, in my head, it just doesn't click that SDCs are going to make homes not affordable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great question. So we're somewhat limited because these are essentially rates. We can't build in discounts unless there is a cost basis or, and unless we could show that they use less water, affordable housing uses less water. So the way that we've tried to address that is by assuming that a smaller home or dwelling unit will use less water and will be more affordable. So now the way that plays into housing, and as part of this big report that we were part of, Echo Northwest did research to see what the impact of SDCs really might be on housing affordability. I think there was a lot left to question about what's the cause and effect, but what we've heard from the development community, and I think is borne out to some degree in this report, is that higher SDCs essentially require developers to build larger, more expensive homes in order to get the financial return that they need to get to make a development financially feasible for them. So if you can reduce the SDCs Or if you could reduce them for smaller homes, you make it easier for them to build smaller homes and make the return that they need to make. So it might not result immediately in lower, as we know, the market sets the price for these home sales, but the hope is it makes it easier for developers to build lower cost homes over time.
I think the other thing I just wanted to add too, so in terms of affordability, what the SDC does is it puts the burden of the cost for growth and the demand from growth on the developer and not on the current ratepayers, right? So if you weren't charging these SDCs, then our current ratepayers would have to make up that difference to pay for that infrastructure that is needed for those new homes, for new businesses.
Thank you.
That's it? Okay. I mean, I think that's an important point that, yeah, if it's not in the SDCs, then it's the burden on, the whole class of ratepayers. So let's go back to the question about multifamily and talk about middle housing. So I've always thought of SDCs as being per housing unit, but they're not. It sounds like they're not. So if someone wants to build, say, a triplex, and they just want 1 meter, if they're going to build it to be sold, presumably they would put separate meters in because they're going to be separate parcels. But if they're going to build it to be rentals, to be one owner, they could just put in 1 meter and serve all 3 units from 1 meter and pay 1 SDC instead of 3?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Be more expensive that way, though.
Well, how often does that happen?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we haven't had a lot of middle housing, right? So we don't have a track record, really. We have some. We have had a triplex, which is a rental one where they're being kept as rentals. We've had a number of duplexes.
But the developer, as they're if they're developing a triplex, they could look at what do those units look like? What's going to be the demand in each of those units, and perhaps size the meter. Hopefully they're going to size the meter appropriately and not oversize the meter. So we're going to charge based on the meter that they're putting in, and our engineering department would review that to make sure that it's appropriately sized. But there's some opportunity for savings if they appropriately size the meter to meet the demand of the unit. So ideally, the smaller the unit, the less demand, the less water fixtures that are going to be in there, right?
I guess I'm thinking about incentives. And so if the SDCs if you can only pay 1 SDC and have 3 units, it is disincentivizing creating ownership potential, right? And maybe some people would go ahead and do 3 separate units just because they want to maintain their flexibility for whether they sell units or rent them.
I hear you on that, and I see what you're saying. If you are building these for sale, my guess is you're building them for sale, and you're going to have separated lines going into each unit because you're going to have to. It's going to be a thing. I don't think the SDC price on this in particular is going to be enough to drive a decision instead to rent those units. I think that decision's probably already made at that point. We do have some rental units that have come online in the last couple of years that are triplexes and duplexes. I'm happy to do a little research just to see. But the other piece of this is I've also seen entire duplexes being sold. I haven't necessarily in duplexes seen one half sold to one owner and another half sold to another owner. So that's also just a nuance where I think you're probably 3, 4, or 5 units. You're going to start seeing those individually sold more than if it's a duplex. Is my guess.
Well, and plus it was only with last year's, with the middle housing code that it became easier to parcel them on separate lots, right? Before that was difficult, if not impossible.
But it's not hard for us to have that conversation with Vera. By the time we come back with all of this, we'll have more information about what that looks like.
So you know, we've talked, prior councils, we've talked for a long time about, we hear people saying they waived SDCs for affordable housing, say. And we've kind of gone circular about, can we just waive SDCs, or do we have to backfill them from a city budget in some place? And where have we come down on that?
I have done a ton of research. You can jump in, but correct me, I think is probably the good way to put it.
Present an alternative.
Awesome. The state statute allows for affordable housing units at a certain rate to be forgiven. We would have to adopt a code that did that process. Anything over that, we don't have the flexibility to forgive SDCs. We would have to backfill it using general fund or other dollars in order to do so. When we did this with like the ADUs, the reason we had to do that is there was no affordable component placed on the ADUs. And just size alone isn't enough to say it's going to be affordable. So because it was allowed for any use, we couldn't say you can waive those SDCs. The city came up with, I think it was like $35,000 in general funds to backfill into the SDC fund those dollars.
Can't you use CET funds to backfill also, if it's affordable housing?
It's, for affordable housing, I don't have to necessarily. We could, and we have. So CET funding, like on Hillside, we gave funds to Hillside knowing what their SDC costs were going to be. So we did that to try and alleviate some of the SDC costs to Hillside.
So I'm going to demonstrate my ignorance about the water system. You have a meter coming into your home. You have the 3/4 inch, which I take it that's the smallest. Okay. And your home's not new. Say it's, 30 years old. And you decide to build an ADU in the backyard. Can you just extend water from your home to the ADU, or do you have to have a new meter to build that?
You can extend, but if if there's a desire to at some point sell that ADU, then we would recommend that you put in a new meter and a new service line.
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
a part of the challenge is providing customer service and making sure that we're protecting, as a water provider, protecting the owner and the tenant, right? So if somebody's not paying the bill, but the tenant might be paying their bill, we don't want to have to shut off the tenant. So ideally, everybody should have their own service. There's a cost associated with that. But in terms of the ADU, we do allow them to share the service if it's appropriately sized. So sometimes it might not be appropriately sized. for the
Okay,
home
and just
the
to make
ADU.
sure I understand, on wastewater, we do charge, West does charge an
Per ADU.
SDC per unit. Not, we couldn't have this idea of one bill for 3 in a triplex or whatever. One SDC for a 3-unit triplex. It would be 3 SDCs. Is that correct? That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Per equivalent dwelling unit is the EDU is what they charge by.
Right. Okay. So it's interesting that this is one where, where it's not necessarily by equivalent dwelling unit. Right.
Well, you don't meter wastewater, thank God.
Yeah.
It's like, and so we have a measure of the potential demand of
Yeah.
each structure that's connected to the water system. So this is I would argue it's a more scientific approach, really. You can only get so much water through each of these different meter sizes, and that's a really good measure of how the system has to be sized to serve its customers, is by that potential demand.
Do we ever
Fit for water.
do we ever see single-family residences or middle housing, to the extent we have it, that need a bigger meter than 3/4? Does anybody ever upsize their meter? Mr. Hazel is nodding, like he's seen that.
I think sometimes people put in larger meters if they're going to, if they're going to have outdoor irrigation systems, they'll put in a larger meter than a normal single-family house would have. So they're going to upsize that to make sure they have sufficient volume to do all the things that they want to do. But generally, almost all single-family homes are going to put in a 3/4 inch meter.
Okay. So that's it for my questions. Did
I would like to
prompt some more questions?
I'd like to concur with Mr. Ghilarducci that thank God they don't meter wastewater on a Saturday after having a couple beers and some jalapeno poppers. There might be too much flushing going on.
I just have, just to touch on what Mayor Beatty said earlier. You were talking about, like if someone, instead of, like if somebody was to rent it, they put in a bigger meter size, that decision process of whether they're going to rent it or
Well,
sell it, right? And
Right.
I feel like just in the pricing would discourage them from renting it as 1 meter. Because like the example you provided, which was 4 to 5 units, let's say, with a 6-inch meter, that's $190,000 as opposed to spending 6 for 3/4 inch separate, right? That's a big.
Well, and I was saying those were large complex
100
buildings,
unit
so there were
complexes.
hundreds of units.
Right, I mean, right, but
multi-building
even if you were to do like a triplex, right, 3 units, if you went with if you wanted to just do all on 1 meter, because you're just planning on renting it, the cost of that would be way more expensive than if you just did 3 individual meters, right? Because if you do like a 3 or 4 inch line, that's 60 grand as opposed to 3 separate 3/4 inch
Oh,
lines,
no,
which is-
my question was, you could do the triplex on the 3/4. You could have 1 3/4 inch meter that serves.
Well, I mean,
A triplex.
It sort of depends on.
You're gonna
what
have
you
very,
in those
you're gonna have
units,
problematic
right?
flows though, aren't you?
You could have some challenges.
You're gonna have
providing
because not
volume.
everyone can have the
So,
water running at the same time with a small
yeah,
meter like that.
If you have, people all inside and somebody's watering their lawn, you might have some volume issues. So you really have to
Yeah.
look at like the size and what sort of fixtures are in that home on a 3/4 inch, would be a challenge. So we're gonna make sure that it's appropriately sized for.
Right, okay.
For the use. And the engineering team works with the developer to make sure that it's being appropriately sized. I do think if somebody's changing, if they're upsizing, from a 1, let's say from a 1 to 1 inch, they'd probably pay the differential on the SDC. So they wouldn't have to come back in. Because ideally, somebody's already paid that $9,500, so they would pay the differential between the 95 to the 19,000, so it wouldn't cost them the full 19,000.
Yeah.
If I could add one thing to, getting back to your point, I think, and having worked with customer data like this for both system development charges and rates, usually, not always, but usually, it works out so that the cost per dwelling unit, the SDC per dwelling unit, is less under a meter size approach than it is so you could add dwelling units before, let's say, a 1 inch meter, that ratio is 1.67. You might be able to get 3 units on a 1 inch meter, and the cost per dwelling unit would be less than if it were 3/4 inch meters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's usually what happens, not the reverse where they end up paying more for having the larger meter.
Okay.
So your question to us is, do we want to go with the 5708 and the staggered by size? Is that the question?
Yes, I believe that is, looking for feedback from council on, are we comfortable with that being the maximum allowable SDC charge and the rate structure that is similar to, or the same as our wastewater structure in terms of that single-family unit on how we have it structured by square footage?
All right, people have comments on that?
I'm okay with it. I don't see, I'm not getting heartburn from it.
Well, I've asked this question before. I'll ask it again. I think I already know the answer, but, the question I would ask is, will increasing the SDCs by this amount from what we currently have, will that discourage development? And I guess my gut reaction is $2,500 will not. And so I got some head nods there. I know that's somewhat unscientific, but it kind of meets the gut reaction test and everything like that. So I can support this. Yeah.
Well, I mean, given where it is in the scale of our neighboring
Yeah, I know.
cities,
It's
I think gives a little bit of comfort on
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right?
What are you stopping Oregon
Yeah.
City from going?
Yeah. Yeah, it was fascinating to me that they're up over 10,000
Yeah.
in so many cities, and I'd love to know what's going on there that they.
I think a lot of it's reflective. Milwaukee's sort of a built-out city, right? Our
Yeah.
infrastructure exists. We don't have a lot of, new green growth out on the boundaries where we have to expand and put in a lots of
Lines.
new infrastructure.
Well,
So
there's a
it's-
lot of land to build on out there.
Yeah.
In those cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a lot of, I think several of those up at the top had some major, major plant upgrades and water capacity upgrades.
Yeah, I know West Lynn's got some, challenges. So here's a question. We hear so much about federal infrastructure money for water improvements. And I just came from a mayor's conference where people were touting the, millions they got from, some were earmarked, some were, Inflation Reduction Act, whatever, for their water systems, for their wastewater systems. We're kind of in a moment where there's more of that who knows how long that will last. But should we be more conservative with our SDC? Because should we be trying for some of that kind of money?
What was it?
I guess one thing we would say is, without having that money in hand, it would be speculative whether that would benefit
Pan
the
out.
city. And you can always revisit the system development charges if you were to successfully get some of that assistance. So you could come back and reduce the charges. These have to be based, in my view, on kind of what you know now. That's all what we know is what's in the master plan and what projects are needed to meet the expected growth in the city. I wish I knew how to access that money. There are probably folks out there who do, but I know the city is
Well, I was
managed
going
the grant successfully.
to say, I mean, there's some state money, there's some federal money. There's certainly, I mean, they quantified at one session I was at, the need in the state is still, 10 times the amount of money that's coming, or,
I guess I've always sort of viewed those dollars, those state and federal dollars, as resources to help us pay for rehabilitation and replacement of existing assets that we have, because those can be pretty costly as well. And that as we're preparing for growth, that we look to the developer to provide that assistance in paying for that growth, and not, as I said earlier, not our current ratepayers.
Okay. Other views on the rate question, on the 5708? This side of the table has said they're okay with it.
Yeah, I can support what is proposed, and I appreciate that we have an opportunity to revisit if things change.
Yeah, I can support this.
Okay. Looks like we have a green light for you, so.
Thanks. So we'll put together, we'll get something on the agenda at least 90 days out, and bring that back for the public hearing.
I would like to have a little more detail on the multifamily and the plexes and how it usually plays out, what we know, to what extent we know. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. All right. That's our agenda item, unless the city manager would like to talk about anything that's sort of.
Do you want to talk about housing now?
Sure.
So a couple weeks ago, I received some outreach from the governor's office asking about ways that the state could influence housing that we might be interested in talking about. This all is stemming from conversations that occurred around legislation the governor supported, 3414, and some interest in trying to resurrect the bill, but also do it in a way that I think cities are more heard, and I really appreciate that. In conversations with other city managers, there was a focus on two pieces of this. One is there's some lack of understanding about how many units are coming through cities and how many are being approved, just straight up. No policy involved in it, just how many units, how many applications are actually denied, which are very few, and how many variances are needed and how much process is needed at this point following 2001. The city managers have talked about wanting to do a tour just for staff on at the state level to show them different developments. Be a half-day thing, 2.5 to 4 hours, depending on how many they're willing to give us. And then probably 2 to 3 cities that we would show during that tour. We would give them 2 different times, one tour on this side of the river, one tour on the other side of the river, just to make sure that staff could make it based on their schedules. So that is what I am intending, unless you all have concerns about me doing sort of a show and tell about the developments that we've done here in the city. I'm intending to participate and help lead that conversation. Are there any concerns?
I think it's great, actually, because I do think there's a misperception about how much housing we have coming. We have a lot of housing in the pipeline, and not every city does, but I think there's a number of cities that do.
I've been a little surprised, actually, at, so this is my own judgment, I would have assumed that Lake Oswego had fewer units being developed right now, and that they'd have fewer affordable units. In the last year and a half, they've approved 1,000 doorways. For a 1,000 doorways for a pretty built-out city. And so part of this is we all assume that we're doing it, but somebody else isn't. And that's the story that's sort of getting told about cities, when in reality, I think smaller cities in the region, the metro region, are actually building at a really high capacity for who we are. So we just want to tell that story. We're going to focus this on, like I said, only staff to help them. We're going to write one-pagers that go over how many units have been applied for, how many have been granted, any change or variance requirements that we put into place. I'm probably going to take them to a couple of our sites where we've had flood issues, and about kind of how we work through those flood issues, just so that they can see when we have put any roadblocks in development, it's been to keep people safe in the units once they're built, and that we've come to resolution around those units. So I'm going to work on that. Then there's a side piece of this that the mayor is interested in, also working with elected officials to use the same information to take some legislative individuals out on the same tour. And so I am meeting with the mayor and the representative just to have a brief conversation about whether or not that makes sense, just so that they can see the same information. There will probably be a city manager on that tour. It will not be me. We have a few city managers who are former planners who I think can have just a far more eloquent conversation, high level, than I can have. So we would be placing them in that tour. Lake Oswego is willing to give us their minibus, which is great. So I think it's their senior center minibus, which will be a lot of fun. Fits 12 to 14 people. They're bringing snacks if any of you decide to go on this tour. And it's going to probably be around the end of September. So I am going to talk, I sent you the email from Matt just so that you could see it. I am planning on calling Matt tomorrow. We have a scheduled time at 3 o'clock just to talk through this as a proposal and see if he's interested. A few of the people that are going, if this worked and if they were interested, you actually know several of the people who would be involved in that tour, including Kim Thomas, who used to be on our planning commission, Kirsten Green, who used to be Emma's mentor, and helped us write the comp plan. So these are people who know Milwaukie fairly well. We just want to show them the development that's happened since that time. Okay? Are there other things you'd like me to send as a message from you all to the governor's office around anything you think the state needs to be working on around housing?
Well, just to comment, I think that this is a really good idea that, we're going to, I think that there's a level of connection and believability that can be conveyed better in person. So, seeing these things, and I think that's a really good idea to show what's approved and what's not approved. And, I think back to my almost 4 years on the Planning Commission, and I can remember 2 that weren't approved, okay? And one of them was for the flood issues, And so it's like, we had this many come in, this many approved, these were disapproved for these reasons. And and there was resolution that came out of that so that they, a alternative could be presented. So there was a reason, not just willy-nilly, not in our backyard reasons, because I think there's some perception issues out there, and so.
And I think the Planning Commission made people safer.
And in both of those I think I know what they are, and in both those cases, they did come back with a revised
they did.
plan.
They
They
did.
did get ultimately approved, and they were relatively small numbers of units. Our big numbers of units are,
Have been flying through.
have been going through easily. So,
Okay. I will share the one pager with you all, just so that you see what we're doing and have that if anybody calls you. But Suzanne created a Survey Monkey so we can do this quickly for all the cities that are involved in the metro region, and we can collect that and get the content out. Yes, Mayor?
I did want to, in thinking about other things to message to the governor's office, I guess, I forwarded everyone an email from Willamette Riverkeeper that expressed some concerns about the makeup of the governor's council of advisors. I heard those identical concerns at the Oregon Mayor's Conference this weekend, talking with people who have been sitting in on some of those meetings for the LOC and some of the mayors who have been sitting in on those meetings, that council, those teams that have been assembled are very developer heavy, and nobody really from cities and nobody with city experience. So, to whatever extent you feel you can work that in, I'd say, that's a concern I have.
Absolutely. I will say there's a couple of people on the list I went through and looked at the advisory body today, just to make sure that I could back that statement up before I made it. There are a couple of people on there that I know. So I have sent out emails or made quick phone calls to try and speak with a few people who have been in those meetings and to get their sense for where we're at, why we're there, what concerns they may have. These are people I deeply respect and have worked with in the past.
Well, one of the stories I heard was that, a couple of developers got up at a table and said, this happened to me, and this was denied, and this was denied for this reason, and da-da-da. And then when LOC went back to the cities and fact-checked that, it wasn't accurate. It wasn't the whole story.
My understanding, we had a couple of assistant city managers and city managers attend one of the meetings. It was pretty derogatory to what cities were doing.
Yeah.
So that's why I think this is helpful. It's just we're not speaking at the same table. We all do it. This isn't a negative. This is create understanding. So I think we're just trying to get people in a space where they can hear each other and see. It doesn't mean one side's right or wrong. It just means we need to talk about what we're really doing and make sure that any recommendations are based in the reality of what changes we're having here in Milwaukie. I'll say it on the record in case anybody is watching. We have 10,000 units here in Milwaukie 5 years ago. And over the last 5 years of approvals, we're looking at an 1,800 unit increase. It's an 18% increase in a city in a very short amount of time that's already built out. We're excited about it. We think it's great. This is not a negative, but it's a lot of units that we are approving to try and make sure that we can meet the demands. Is that fair? Okay. So, if anybody has anything that you have, triggers as a concern, I'm also going to talk to them about the tree code piece, because we do have a tree code for under 10,000 units. I'm going to show them a couple of places where we had clear cutting and just talk about that so that we can dialogue around what's now there and some heat island effect issues that we're going to have in those neighborhoods. I'm also going to talk to them briefly about the fact that when we adopted the tree code, there was actually a lot of conversation about assuring, we did this in part to assure that people in poverty didn't lose trees, because shading and natural spaces are often the things that are lost for people when you create density, and that is often what happens with creating affordable housing. So that was intentional at the time. We'll go from there. Is that all? Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. If there's nothing else from anyone, we will adjourn and reconvene at 6 o'clock for the regular session. Okay, we are adjourned.